What do you got for me today, Timmy?
Well, let's tell people about our podcast, John.
All right. What's the title of that podcast again? I'm bald.
I'm blind, and we're
Still
buddies.
We're buddies.
Awesome.
We've been friends for 30 years.
30 years.
TGIF, good Timmy C. How was my doctor friend today?
Good. The mobile branch of Ball, Blind, and Buddy Studios is in northern Lower Peninsula, Michigan. It's a nice day.
Say that again. What part of the peninsula?
The northern Lower Peninsula.
Okay, so there's a great Homer Simpson line where they accidentally take a wrong turn, and he says, "We got to get out of here, Marge. It's not safe for people like us in the upper lower middle class."
Or when Lisa gets banished to Monster Island, and she's like, "That's not real, is it?" And they're like, "No, it's an archipelago."
I like it. So everybody good out there in Michigan? Mom and Pop's doing okay?
Yep. Back in the house. It's good. Yeah.
It's always helpful to have a doctor's son that can be there in case, right?
I try. Yeah.
And when do you fly home?
Sunday. So this will be out. Cool. You'll be listening to this, folks, listeners. I'll be back in Wisconsin with my head on.
Very cool. Are you doing anything for St. Patrick's Day?
It's Hootie's birthday.
Really?
Yeah. So we'll have to see
what
he
old?
wants to do.
About 6?
5.
Okay. All right. So I was off by a year. Yeah, we actually our first pup, Isabel, who has, and this always happens when you talk about dogs with dog owners. She passed, and she passed the week before COVID. The month before COVID, I'm sorry. And we got her on St. Patrick's Day. So my son just turned 13, and so she would have just turned 14 because they had the same birthday. So kind of cool.
Yeah.
But Katie's always loved St. Patrick's Day. And one of my, every year, my cousin will send me a text on St. Patrick's Day, and it says, "Happy, it's socially acceptable to be drunk all day." So.
We got to be in Ireland on St. Patrick's Day. Maybe this was like 2015, 16. It was a lot of fun.
That is awesome. Yeah. Isn't Ireland great?
Yeah, I love it. I'd totally relocate there.
Heartbeat, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Heartbeat. Yeah. And the thing that's so funny about it is stay out of the cities. Like Dublin was neat, but it's, like any industrial city, so to speak. It's the country that just makes it dynamic and fun and that kind of stuff.
Totally. Yeah. Speaking of countries, John, the Czech Republic has joined our long and illustrious list of listeners. So,
very cool.
Yeah, thank you out there.
Very cool. How are we doing in terms of episodes? Is there a more popular one? Obviously, DE&I was very popular. I think today's going to be popular. We'll get into the topic in a few moments, but any updates on topics, listeners beyond that?
DEI was good. I think the stroke of the pen about executive orders has been good. And the TikTok takedown about the TikTok ban was also quite popular. So check those out, folks.
All right. Excellent. Well, Timmy, before we get started, why don't we didn't you say we had a trivia question, and then I'll go back and answer last week's trivia?
Do.
Okay.
This was submitted by a friend of the show, Kirk, and he wants us to name the 2 colleges who played in the first NCAA American football game using the metric system.
Okay.
He thinks it's the only game. He thinks it's probably the only game, but definitely the first.
Okay. All right. That's got to be, I have a hunch who it is, but I won't guess. But I do know the very first football game. And the reason I know that is I used to have a friend of mine. We're still friends. I just haven't seen him in years. That attended one of the colleges that played in the very first football game. And in case it's the same thing, I won't mention who it is. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, do you know the answer to last week's trivia question that I submitted, Timmy? What is the largest cathedral in the world?
I want to say probably St. Peter's Basilica.
You would be correct, yeah. And the reason I asked that is Vatican City being the smallest country in the world, I find it ironic that the largest cathedral is located there. But yes, it is, in fact, the largest basilica cathedral in the world. Have you ever had a chance? Have you ever been there?
No, I haven't. It'd be neat.
Yeah, you and Blue Leaf should definitely put it on your bucket list.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, that should be a topic for a future podcast. As we're
bucket list? Oh, yeah.
Bucket lists. Yeah. You know, what do you want to do? Like, I'd love to have a hole-in-one, in golf. But if
Yeah.
it doesn't happen, I'm okay with that. But I do want to go to Australia and New Zealand. That's definitely on my bucket list.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
I want to go to London. I haven't been to London yet.
Really? You have
Yeah.
not?
No.
Even when I lived over there, you didn't come over?
Nope.
Huh. I had about 10 people that came over.
Yeah.
I think they just use it as an excuse. Well, Timmy, I'm going to ask a trivia question as well, if that's cool. You ready?
Go for it.
So we obviously know about the situation with Ukraine and Russia, and I want to be clear. I support Ukraine. I'm not one of these people who's going to put it on Facebook, largely because I'm not on Facebook, but I believe we have an obligation to defend our European allies, particularly our democratic European allies. But why am I bringing this up? Because both Ukraine and Russia have a McDonald's. The reason I'm highlighting that is about 30 years ago, there was a theory espoused by a famous international relations writer by the name of Thomas Friedman. He's won the Pulitzer Prize. He writes for the New York Times. Very well known. You'd see him on the Sunday morning talk shows. Anyway, he put forth his best-selling book, and I forget the name of it, but it was right around when we graduated from college, what he called the Golden Arches Theory, which was the idea that no two countries that both have McDonald's should go to war, the basic idea. And up until Ukraine and Russia going to war, it was still true. The basic premise is you reach a certain level of economic development, you share economic ties. It's like your boss. I can tell you at least a handful of times a year, I think most people want to go in and tell their boss to shove it where the sun don't shine, right? But you don't because you're economically dependent upon that job. Same basic premise here. That's all leading to my next question. What is the only state capital in the United States that does not have a McDonald's? Any idea, Tim? If you do, don't guess it.
I guessed Honolulu, but you told me that was wrong. So.
And that would be incorrect. And by the way, tell the listeners you found, going back to what was pointed out by Ben about No Country for Old Men, what is the unique aspect of it?
There is no music as a soundtrack to the movie. However, there is a brief period where a mariachi band, in reality, in the movie plays. So
Yeah, he'd just been shot. He's drunk and he's lying down on the stairs in Mexico. Yeah, and a mariachi band wakes him up. That's correct. Yeah, but that is correct. There is no soundtrack, which makes it even more powerful when you actually take a step back and watch it, knowing that. So
now, the only other movie I can think of that happening is, did you ever see Flight 93, United?
I did see parts of it. Yeah,
that is really powerful, and no soundtrack there.
Yeah, I don't want to. I as you know, I went out to Shanksville last summer, and that was extraordinarily powerful. And it's just one of those things that I just don't need to see again. You know what I mean? I don't need to be reminded. But I respect the heck out of it. That now that you point that out, that's an interesting factoid there.
Yeah.
But let's get into it, Timmy, because what are we talking about today?
We're talking about a recent case taken up by the Supreme Court regarding. I'm going to use the word conversion therapy. And, we know this is a challenging and hot button issue out there. So we want to say that, but we also want to say that, regardless of how we discuss this, all people deserve respect, and our considering rapidly evolving concepts and the law does not mean in any way to diminish that. And it cannot and should not erase somebody's personhood. So I believe we are so much more than our gender identities. And so I just want to say that before we launch into this.
Hear, hear, doctor. Hear, hear. I will defer to your medical expertise as it relates to that. But let me just give kind of a brief background, kind of nerd out, if you will, because if people ask you what would be your dream job, I always wanted to be a Supreme Court justice, even when I was a kid, because I'm fascinated by the law. And in fact, after the kids are growing up and in school, I've always thought maybe I'd go back to law school just because I want to do the challenge, not for any particular purpose, just the educational value of it. But we'll see if that comes to pass. But I did teach constitutional law. And really, the federal court system, I'll be brief, there's 94 district courts. And that's the first sort of step on the ladder, if you will. And there is one in every state. And the remaining 44 are split up based on population. So, of course, by extension, California has the most. Delaware, Rhode Island, Wyoming, and so forth have one. That's the basic idea. Now, if you lose at the district court level, you do have the courts of appeals. There's 13 of those, and the country is divided into 12 pieces, and then there's the federal appellate court. And, if you win there, or if your case is overturned on appeal, which, by the way, is exceedingly rare, they estimate it's anywhere from 7 to 20% of the cases that are decided in the lower courts are overturned ultimately on appeal. Now, that's taking in national and state law, but it gives you the sense that if you've lost at the district court level, you're likely to lose at the appellate level, right? Mm-hmm. But this is where things become interesting. Because if traditionally the Supreme Court will hear cases if there is a disagreement between the appellate courts. So let's say the Ninth Circuit Court out in California rules one way and the Fifth Circuit Court in Louisiana rules another on the same basic issue, they have to adjudicate it and decide it. So then it goes to the Supreme Court, which highlights the question as to how frequently can you get to the Supreme Court. And you ready for this little tidbit, Timmy?
Yeah.
You have a better chance of becoming a professional athlete than you do of ever having your case reach the Supreme Court. Because about 78,000 cases a year petition for what they call cert or certiorari, which is they want to be heard. Even with that, they only hear about 70 to 80 cases. So you have a 1% chance on after you petition for cert of even being granted to be heard. And typically the Supreme Court will hear cases where there's a disagreement between the appellate divisions. And that's what happened in this case. So just the reporting from the New York Times, Dateline March 10th, it says the Supreme Court said on Monday that it will hear a First Amendment challenge to a Colorado law banning professional counseling services engaged in conversion therapy intended to change a minor's gender identity and or sexual orientation. What say you, Tim? How do you feel about this? You're the doctor. I'm going to go with you first.
Well, so I actually went and looked at the text of the law, and what I read said conversion therapy means efforts to change an individual's sexual orientation, including, and then it went on. So it actually was the sexual orientation, and the rest was under includings. So I thought that was interesting, and this might.
What does that mean? Explain that.
Well, I think it might be an example. Remember, last week we were talking about concept creep, and I think conversion therapy as to changing someone's sexual orientation, I think there is decent evidence that is not helpful or
that it is not. It does
right
not work,
or potentially harmful. But then you start to lump in transgenderism with your sexual orientation, and I don't think the two necessarily sync up.
Okay. Well, let's peel that onion apart piece by piece, because the American Medical Association, which is sort of the gold standard, if you will, but you have some issues with it, so I'll defer to you, and you can, tell me how I'm wrong in just a moment. They stopped arguing that homosexuality is a disorder, according to the traditional definition back before we were born, 1973. So we're talking 50 plus years ago. There are 20 states, including plus Colorado, more than 20 states, I should say, plus Colorado, that actually ban the practice of conversion therapy. Now, to your point, you're separating transgender issues versus sort of homosexuality. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think conversion therapy is a label, and I think it has a lot of emotion tied to it. And I think you can sort of hide other things under conversion therapy because nobody wants to do conversion therapy.
Right. So you're saying, even as a doctor, conversion therapy, I go to a doctor, I say I'm homosexual, I sit down with you for 6 months or what have you, and you say I'm going to convert you to being heterosexual. That doesn't work, correct?
Well, so there are...
I'm simplifying it, obviously.
Yeah. Well, there are people who say that does work. And there are groups that say this is helpful. But I would say, as a mainline medical practice, it isn't, right?
Okay. Now, is this as quackery, if you will, as those who say the earth is flat? You can say that. You're entitled to that First Amendment speech, but it doesn't mean you're correct. Or am I overstating it?
Well, it's really interesting because, I'm just thinking back to, I heard of someone giving a documentary where they had people who, say they changed their sexual orientation with potentially spiritual awakenings or therapy. And I don't want to discount their experience. But at the same time, if a state said, we don't think, this is a reasonable medical practice, I think that's okay. But the other part is, let's look at this another way. If there's a marketplace for things and people want things, and when we talk about things, we're basically saying ideas, and you start to block access to ideas, that is, that seems like it could be concerning, because what you could say is, well, we have sophisticated consumers and they know what they want, and they're not going to sit on a couch for whatever getting unhelpful therapy either. So we could say, well, let's trust the people.
Right. And I'll be perfectly candid with you. The argument that is going to be heard at the Supreme Court was granted primarily on First Amendment grounds, which is, does this therapist have a First Amendment right that supersedes? Because again, as it relates to amendments, it's always a balancing act, right? I mean, First Amendment says, yes, you can say pretty much anything you want, except, threaten the president, for instance, or you go into a crowded movie theater and yell fire. The question the court is going to wrestle with, it appears, is whether or not the First Amendment rights of this therapist, who argues that it does work, even though the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, and others have, disavowed it. As far back as 2019, the American Medical Association said this is not working, and took a stand on that. The question is whether or not her First Amendment rights supersede that of the state to regulate what they consider to be medical treatment. And I will take issue with the fact that this is just an idea, Tim, because studies have indicated that people who receive this type of therapy are 4 to 5 times more likely to have attempted suicide by the time they reach adulthood. That's not an insignificant amount.
Therapy for what?
But yeah, there's the rub. I understand. Yeah,
right.
But again, to me, it seems to me that if the majority of states, and I say this even knowing in hindsight how COVID went, if the majority of states are saying this medical treatment is unacceptable for us, and it's not a majority yet, but say it's 20, 25 states are saying this is unacceptable, should we not defer to local expertise on that? Or do you think the First Amendment grounds is so sacrosanct that you should be able to do this if you live in, say, a state that doesn't have it?
Well, I got a couple of more angles on this that I want to run by you. So if you look at the Colorado law, it says efforts to change behaviors or gender expression. So my sister was telling me about a show she watched on TV called What Not to Wear. And there was a lady and she was wearing a lot of sweatshirts, and the consultant came in and said, you know what? You should try some skirts and some dresses. So if that was in Colorado and the person giving advice was a therapist, they would be in violation of the law because they were trying to change someone's gender expression. And that seems pretty darn vague, right? So I think one of the hallmarks of good law, John, is to know you're going to commit a crime before you do it.
Correct.
So if I walk up to a lady, take her purse and run, I know that's a crime. But is telling someone, well, maybe you want to try a skirt for the job interview instead of a pantsuit.
Yeah.
First, so I think this law in itself is just flawed because it's so vague. It's
very broadly written, so to speak. It can incorporate a lot of stuff. I get it. And again, that's oftentimes what the court has to deal with. So back at the turn of the century, there was a case involving John Ashcroft, and I forget who the defendant was, but it was Ashcroft versus Free Speech Society or what have you. And it was about child pornography that had been artificially created. Yeah. And basically the court had to say it's legal First Amendment free expression because it doesn't actually involve the harming of a child. And this law is written so broadly that it could incorporate, to your point, telling someone to put a skirt on. That's not necessarily trying to influence their identity, just telling them how to dress better. Right?
Yeah.
Which I think all of us could use. We've become a little slovenly, have we not? Yeah.
And another angle to this is, advocates will talk about gender journeys and gender fluidity and that there is some play in one's gender identity. And so if they acknowledge that, and the only therapy you have approved is affirmation, then the ratchet only turns one way towards transgenderism, right? So saying, hey, let's slow down a minute. You're going through puberty. This can be unsettling for a lot of people. Let's start to understand. Let's think about what's going on. If that is prohibited, I think that's a concern.
Well, you had actually, when we had talked about this, and I can talk about this for hours, but it was a 3-judge panel in Colorado in the 10th Circuit, which is based in Colorado.
Yeah.
And in dissent, Judge Harris Hartz writes, the courts must be particularly wary that in a contentious and evolving field, the government and its supporters would like to bypass the marketplace of ideas and declare victory for their preferred ideas by fiat. There is an element of that I recognize. However, here's where I draw the line. And this is how I've always this is the libertarian bent in me that comes out. I always ask the question, 2 basic questions. Is it an adult, and can they give consent? Because one of the things that I always highlight is, people are like, well, if we legalize this, then you can marry your dog or what have you. No, a dog can't give consent. My thing, particularly for this is, and this is where I actually come down on the side of what would quote unquote be more conservative allies, which is, puberty blockers and things of this nature for children that are under the age of 18. If they're still under their parents' sort of protection, the parents should have a say in this. right? I mean, that's the big issue with this Tennessee case with, kids that want to transition. Once you're an adult, you can do anything you want as far as I'm concerned. The question is whether or not minors. So that's where I kind of get a little bit more murky and gray, if you will, on this issue. Tell me how you're seeing it, Tim, because to me, this big issue is it deals with minors. 20 plus states have said this is harmful. We're going to outlaw it. That seems to me to be okay and would surpass the First Amendment rights of this therapist who argues otherwise. I could be wrong. We'll see what the court says.
Well, so here's a couple thoughts. So first of all, the notion that the science behind this is good or well established is not true.
The science behind what? Conversion therapy or anti-conversion?
No, sorry, behind gender affirmation.
Okay, all right. So let's explain to me what gender affirmation is again.
So gender affirmation is a young person comes in, says, I feel like gender X, my body's gender Y, and they're like, oh, you must have gender dysphoria. Let's get you on the pipeline, right? Towards
what's the pipeline?
The pipeline is cross-gender hormones and potentially surgery.
Okay. A couple questions. First and foremost, how old is this person?
They can present as low as like 5 or 6 years old.
You're kidding me, really?
No.
I'll defer to you on this medical stuff. That's okay. All right.
So that's what happens. And there's been a recent dump. I don't know if you ever came across these. They're called the WPATH files. So there's this professional society for transgender health, and someone leaked internal emails within WPATH. And they really outline a couple things. They outline that young people really can't understand some of the long-term consequences of a choice to transition, such as infertility.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah.
By definition, the law separates children and adults. It does so for a good reason. But again, this applies to everything for me, which is if you commit a crime and you're 16, you shouldn't be able to be charged as an adult. I understand the heinousness of it, but if you're going to say children are children and adults are adults, you have to be consistent. Please continue.
Yeah, and there are real long-term consequences, which aren't particularly well known. It's also come out recently that journal articles have been suppressed by the authors because they came to conclusions opposite of the prevailing notion on this transgender stuff. There's also a thing called the Cass Report, which was commissioned in the UK to look into their gender-affirming treatment. And basically, it essentially says that there isn't good science to support puberty blockers and et cetera in minors. And you'll see the UK, Sweden, Europe is really rolling back on this stuff. So, and I think that's probably more in line with the science. So the notion that these professional organizations support it is more a matter of ideological capture than quality of evidence, in my opinion.
Well, why do you suppose are you saying the same thing about the American Medical Association?
Yes,
are you lumping
absolutely.
them with WPATH? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. See, I'm not familiar. I'm not participatory in these organizations. I don't know. You're the doctor. I'll defer to you. I'm not saying that there is not an element of you better, go along with the orthodoxy or you're going to be sort of shunned. That being said, though, I mean, the American Medical Association, and I want to be clear, it sounds to me that you're talking about how this law is broad and could lump in transgender or a gender, what did you call it, affirmation?
Yeah.
So my understanding in the black and white context, to simplify it, is I come in and I'm clearly homosexual and I'm clearly heterosexual, and you sit down with a conversion therapist. I don't think that's going to work. Am I wrong? Meaning they're going to convert me?
I would not think that is going to work.
Okay. But where you're drawing sort of issues with this is it lumps in transgender and gender dysphoria and things of this nature. Is that basically a summation of your feelings?
Yeah. I think saying, hey, with any other disorder, think about this, John. They call it gender dysphoria, basically a strong, pervasive feeling. If you came in with any other psychological condition like that, the first thing they would say is, well, let's slow down. Let's understand.
Let's unpack it.
Let's unpack it. Let's think about why you might be feeling this way. And then let's figure out what we want to do about it, the things we can change and what we think and what we do that will make this better for you. And I think if you're barring any of that, then you're deviating from fundamental principles of how we do other psychological things.
Yeah. I get the idea that you're putting forth that maybe this law is written in such a way that it's too broad and incorporates But
Yeah.
maybe if I was simplifying it down to this, if a state bans conversion therapy, and I'm talking in the strictest sense, trying to convert someone who's homosexual to heterosexual or vice versa, whatever it may be, I would have serious problems with that and would sustain the law. I get what you're saying, though, which is perhaps this Colorado law, as tended to be the case with the famous case with the baker who was asked to make a cake, a religious baker who was asked to make a cake. The law, as it was written, I've listened to the oral argument, was very, very sort of discriminatory towards religiosity in general and so forth. So I get what you're saying. It's not mission creep. What are you calling it? Concept
creep.
Yeah. And I get what you're saying. My concern, though, is I would be very wary of how this is ultimately decided. And this tends to be the case in the mainstream press writ large, not through any fault of their own, but going to the Supreme Court tends to be very, very complicated and complex. There's nuances. I stress the color gray as much as possible because, you can simplify it and say, oh, the Supreme Court sided with this. And that's not necessarily really all completely true. So I'm curious to see how this individual case plays out. But my feeling is the following, which is, number one, let's separate adults and consent, meaning minors can't give consent. They're not adults, so to speak. Secondarily, I don't think you can change someone's sexual orientation. If you're dealing in the gray areas, which it appears you are, and are stressed about some of these, organizations, quote unquote, that engage in advocacy, they may be, none too honest about their intentions. Okay.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to think about is what is the harm of the procedure, right? And I think when the
what is the harm of conversion therapy?
Or
I could come
procedure.
up with 1,000 different harms.
Right. Well, but there's also harms of gender affirmation too, and I think that's what has spurred other laws.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's a complicated issue for sure.
Wow. I this is something, and I say this all the time. I have friends of mine who have told me I couldn't deal with it if one of my kids was gay. I could care less because I genuinely believe that you were born that way. But I'll be perfectly candid with you. I've never really encountered gender dysphoria, transgender, and so forth. I know people that are going through it and so forth. It seems to me to be a real attestation to who they are, but I'll also stress they're adults. So for me, that's, go ahead and figure it out.
Yeah. So. And it's also to say, these are folks in real distress, just like all of us, just trying to find answers. And we should be supportive of people as people and give options to people as we can. So.
Okay. And by the way, just going back earlier, I forgot to say, you don't need a majority to vote to grant cert. How does the court determine which cases it's going to hear? Typically, it's a division between the appellate divisions, as I talked about, but only 4 of the 9 judges have to vote to hear it. And once it's granted cert, but William Douglas used to say it only the most important number in the Supreme Court, 5. Get 5 votes. That's the key.
Yeah. So. And there's a book, The Shadow Docket. I forget who it's by.
I think it's William Baude. Yeah, Baude. Yeah.
Yeah. All through this process of cert, and it's very interesting.
Well, we'll keep an eye on this case, Timmy, and I will always defer to you as it relates to medical expertise. I don't understand some of this stuff, but I'm also not privy to it and upfront with it the way you are, having these organizations that say, yes, we're doing this for X, but it turns out they're, raising money on the side and all these other sort of none too subtle operations.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Well, Timmy, you have a whack job this week, don't you?
I have a double header whack job.
Now, hold on a second. Can I take a guess?
Okay.
Does it come from, I don't know, a university in Wisconsin or no?
One comes from the great state of Wisconsin.
Okay. All right. I'm close enough. All right. Go ahead.
All right. So my first whack job is a man who shall remain nameless, who was in a New Jersey airport and set up an alarm on the body scanner. A pat-down revealed that he had a 5-inch red-eared slider turtle wrapped in a towel shoved in the front of his pants. So the quote from the TSA is, however, I believe this is the first time we have come across someone who is concealing a live animal down the front of his pants.
I certainly hope so.
Whack jobs come in all shapes and sizes, John.
Yes, they do.
So that's my first whack job.
Okay.
My second whack job, see if you see a connection here, is Tony Evers, governor of Wisconsin. In his budget proposal, he is seeking to remove gender-restrictive language from elements of Wisconsin law. So he's swapping out mother for the phrase...
birthing person.
Parent who gave birth to the child.
Oh, God. Yeah. Okay. You know, Timmy, I have to stop and interrupt you though. But I say this all the time. This is how we get Trump.
Yeah.
When you, I tell people all the time that I signed up for liberalism so minorities, women would have equal representation. I believe in free speech, but I didn't sign up. Free speech to me is not a drug addict, defecating in the middle of the street. This is insane. This is how you get Trump. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, exactly. Because, I mean, motherhood and fatherhood is rooted in biology and history, John. I mean, motherhood is so much more than giving birth. Like, I know someone has adopted children, and she is as much a mother to them as other folks.
Here.
And when a toddler falls, are they going to cry, "Parent who gave birth to me"? No, right? They're going to say, "Mama, mommy," right? So I think Governor Evers is like the man trying to sneak the turtle in his pants, hiding a hard, undeniable reality and hoping it gets by without notice.
Golly.
There's my whack job.
I like it. I like how you tied the two together. Well, mine is much simpler, Timmy. There was a fellow who just passed recently in February, and his name was James Harrison. You are familiar with him because I told you about him.
I thought he was a Beatle. I
was joking that maybe he was a president, but that was James Garfield and William Henry Harrison. But nonetheless, he is truly a hero. You ready for this, Timmy?
Yeah.
He basically, the long and the short of it, in the obit in the Washington Post highlighted how he had a rare antibody that they discovered in his blood years and years back. So let me just read this. James Harrison, an Australian railway clerk who helped nearly 2.4 million babies by donating the rare antibodies in his blood every 2 weeks for more than 60 years, died February 17th. Basically, it turns out they discovered when he was a young man that he has this anti-D. Have you heard of this, Timmy, from a medical perspective?
I'm actually not sure on this one.
It's an uncommon antibody, and it can be administered during pregnancy to prevent what they call hemolytic disease of the newborn, HDN. Which can cause serious complications, including stillbirth and neonatal death. Well, it turns out he had high concentrations of this. He donated his blood. They spliced it, and he saved upwards of 3 million people. It's just fascinating because the first time I gave blood, and I come to find out this is kind of their standard stock line, I went back, and this reminds me, I got to get back to donating blood with more regularity. You know what happens when you have kids? You forget about certain things, and I haven't thought about it in a long time, but now I'm going to. Because I donated about 3 or 4 times a year, and I usually did. The first time I donated, though, the woman says to me, "By the way, your blood is rare. We spliced it and saved 3 children." I mean, tell me about a sales technique. Well, it turns out the guy right after me said the same thing. So it turns out that's how they guilt you, but all the better. I mean, could you imagine being James Harrison and you are directly responsible for 2 million people in the earth? That's just a wonderful story. So he is undoubtedly my hero of the week.
That's a lot of orange juice and cookies.
Oh, my Lord, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, Timmy, I appreciate your insight as both a medical doctor and as my buddy. Bald, blind, and buddies will go on regardless. And I appreciated you filing that sort of disclaimer at the beginning as well. I thought that was important because this is an evolving field. I'm not an expert. I don't think very many people are, and sometimes they act like they are. So that makes me nervous. But listen, have a wonderful week. Say hi to your mom and dad and everybody out there. Misbehave, drive fast, take chances.
And this is Tim. Thanks for your thoughts, John, on the court and all that. And this is Tim saying, if everybody likes what you're doing, you're probably not doing anything worthwhile. Take care out there.